My younger brother David tormented me my entire life, betrayed me by secretly impregnating my wife, and now, after being disowned by our parents and cut out of a $2 million inheritance, he's begging me for help, but I can't decide if I should forgive him or finally cut him off forever. My younger brother, David, made my life a living nightmare, then impregnated my wife. Now, he seeks my assistance after our parents disowned him, leaving me their $2 million inheritance. David has always harbored a profound animosity toward me. If you assume this stemmed from envy, you would be mistaken. He was the preferred offspring, not I, so there was no legitimate cause for him to be jealous. To provide some context, our mother consistently lavished attention on David. He was the cherished son of our household. She prepared his meals, handled his laundry, and even requested my help with his academic assignments. I was expected to assist him merely because we were family, yet I never received equivalent regard. I accepted this, possessing a quite independent nature. Perhaps I was partly accountable for consistently fulfilling his demands without reciprocal gestures. He never offered me aid when I needed it, approaching me solely when he desired something. While I was a reserved and solitary youth who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself, he was boisterous and unrefined, much like our father. I also tend to be direct and candid, never sugarcoating matters. I believe my mother may have developed an unfavorable impression of me due to my straightforwardness. This favoritism rendered David the family's darling, and I didn't mind it during our formative years. However, difficulties emerged as he commenced tormenting and ridiculing me for being different. He would taunt me about my height and the fact that I wore spectacles. He would covertly enter my space, peruse my diary, then complain to our mother about my entries. When I confronted him and voiced grievances to our parents about him invading my privacy, they would dismiss it lightheartedly, claiming it was no significant issue. He performed more appalling acts, such as nearly shattering my glasses and placing unpleasant items in my food. He even once put tiny stones in my cereal, but fortunately, I discovered them before they could cause harm to my teeth. When I informed my mother, she brushed it aside, asserting, "This is merely how brothers bond." Whenever we quarreled, David would exploit my vulnerabilities to insult me. We attended the same school, so he was aware I was being harassed by several other children. Instead of supporting me, he aligned himself with my tormentors, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and encouraging them to inflict physical injury upon me, declaring I was just a complete washout. Another time, during a dispute over a minor disagreement I cannot even recall, he told me to take my own life. While I could easily shrug off most taunts, that one truly stung because I was contending with mental distress at the time. I'm faring better now, but it was crushing to learn my own brother wished me dead. Since Dad was often at his workplace and Mom didn't seem to care much, she even reprimanded me once, asserting I was to blame for provoking him. Matters deteriorated incrementally during high school. There was a disturbing occurrence when David attempted to set my hair alight, and astonishingly, our mother shielded him, asserting he was only jesting. Seriously, who behaves like that? Thankfully, my father eventually supported me, highlighting the seriousness of the situation. He even issued a warning about involving law enforcement on David. This moment was a real eye-opener for my brother, as he had previously escaped any repercussions for his actions. He was truly aghast, and my father made it clear that the line had been crossed and David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room to talk. I never anticipated his backing because he always told David how similar they were, which was true. Dad admitted that he had waited for years, awaiting David's maturation, but he was slowly realizing that David was evolving into a significant tormentor. Hearing this from my father was profoundly affirming, and I was almost overcome with emotion. I revealed all David had done to me over the years, and even mentioned the bullying at school. My father was astonished by the extent of my suffering. The next day, he spoke to the principal to guarantee the aggressors received a stern warning about severe consequences if they continued. Later that evening, Dad signed me up for mixed martial arts at our local gym, telling me I needed to develop resilience and confront my tormentors in my life. I admit that a studious, less physically inclined individual like myself attempting to master combat skills might have appeared absurd, but I was exceptionally dedicated. I effectively allocated my time to reconcile academics with rigorous physical training, and the MMA classes transformed my existence and physical form entirely. One day, David resumed his mischief again. He pilfered my allowance, which we received for helping with chores. I had been saving it for a while. David covertly entered my space and seized it. I apprehended him precisely as he prepared to depart on his bicycle with his friends. I demanded he return my money, but David jeered at me, saying all I could do was seek paternal intervention. I don't know what came over me, but I struck him across the countenance. He recoiled in astonishment, fell backward, and I recovered my funds from his possession before pushing him back down. David started wailing boisterously, which was rather amusing. However, my mother rushed out to help him and discover what happened. When she learned I had fought him, she was surprised and chastised me, stating I ought to exhibit superior conduct for David, who appeared to relish my disciplinary session. My mother also voiced grievances to my father regarding my conduct, insisting I required restraint. My dad sternly demanded an explanation from us both. I told him how David had stolen the money I had worked diligently for and saved, while David tried to rationalize his actions by claiming he required funds for an outing and that, as a sibling, I was obligated to assist him. However, Dad told David he was fortunate I merely struck him for theft, as others would have involved the authorities. He continued to tell David that he had no authority to appropriate others' possessions without their permission. David didn't like that and erupted in a fit of rage, likely expecting our mother to take his side, but Dad's stance was unwavering. When David realized he wasn't going to be punished for being hit, he shrieked declarations of his animosity toward me and ran back to his room, locking himself in. Following that incident, David commenced to withdraw from my presence. He had finally understood that he was no longer able to torment me, and that even Dad had ceased endorsing his mischievous behavior. For the first time in a long while, I perceived a sense of parity between us. Though he could no longer physically harm me, he descended to verbal abuse when our parents weren't around. His behavior deteriorated with maturity, growing increasingly irascible and prone to outbursts each year. When I approached him with a question, he would ignore me and walk away, whispering disparaging remarks such as intellectual or failure beneath his breath. If he needed to communicate something, he would convey it via our mother instead of speaking to me directly. When I questioned her about why David couldn't just talk to me, she would implore me to exhibit greater empathy. I couldn't tell if it was just adolescent changes or authentic animosity. Over time, dealing with his comments became intolerable, and I yearned to relocate and escape him. I frequently requested my mother to facilitate a discussion for us to settle our disagreements, but she always declined, stating her unwillingness to intervene. When I asked her opinion on why David treated me this way, she would evade the inquiry. Eventually, I departed for my ideal university, having secured a scholarship as a distinguished scholar. My father hosted a celebration for me, and even my mother seemed proud. However, David remained reserved and detached, scarcely recognizing my accomplishments. The day I left for university was a blend of anticipation for what lay ahead and liberation from the oppressive familial setting. The first few months at university were emancipating. I forged new friendships, relished my courses, and began constructing an existence independent of my childhood's stifling milieu. The perpetual dread of David's verbal assaults dissipated, imbuing me with a fresh feeling of tranquility. During my second year, I encountered my future wife, Karen, at a fraternity event through a mutual acquaintance, and we instantly connected. Coming from a devout upbringing, having children out of wedlock was strongly disapproved of. However, when we found out she was expecting during our concluding year, we resolved to wed immediately post-graduation. Our wedding was a modest, yet joyous observance. Our parents were happy for us, and we enjoyed the celebration. At that moment, I believed Karen was my soulmate. I had always imagined a singular, committed partnership, one woman to come home to and share my life with. Despite other women showing interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was truly fulfilled within my marital bond. Karen was my ideal companion, and my intention was never to cause her pain. However, I later discovered a pair of unfaithful episodes in our marriage. One was a sporadic liaison with a married colleague that extended over numerous years, and the other was a fleeting romantic encounter with a former partner during a visit to her family. One might deem me guileless, and in hindsight, I cannot entirely refute that assessment. Each time we parted ways for a period, I opted to pardon my spouse. I wished to avoid raising our offspring in a fractured household and held faith we could surmount these challenges. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I ascribed it to juvenile errors and misguided decisions. For a period, things seemed to improve, although I was unable to completely repose my confidence in her again. I endeavored to cast aside my reservations, understanding that true forgiveness necessitated a sincere commitment to a new beginning. It's been 4 years since her subsequent deception, and I was assured in my choice to grant her another opportunity. Karen seemed to have changed, and we were truly content envisioning our family's forthcoming years. However, 3 months ago, my existence was devastated anew when she disclosed a prolonged extramarital liaison and intimated that our child might not be biologically mine. Her revelations hit me with immense force. A cascade of astonishment, perfidy, and incredulity engulfed me. I grappled with the sheer magnitude of her admission. In a state of bewilderment, I managed to inquire why such a momentous secret had been withheld and how she could commit such a ruinous act. Her reaction was chilly and dispassionate, as though disconnected from the agony she inflicted. Her unclear replies yielded more uncertainties than clarifications. It was a bizarre and agonizing juncture, facing ruptured faith and ambiguity concerning my own kin. I continued to push Karen for the full account, believing I was entitled to identify the biological parent of the child I had nurtured since infancy. Ultimately, she confessed it was David. My gaze expanded in disbelief as I asked Karen what she meant. She explained that she and David had become friends when I introduced her to my family, and she resided with us during the holiday season, from Thanksgiving through the New Year. David, typically reserved with me, exhibited warmth and courtesy toward her, which pleased me, as I desired Karen to feel at ease. Karen sought acceptance within my familial circle, so she spent significant time with my mother whenever possible. She noticed the chasm between David and myself, and she probed me regarding it. I shared details of our tense connection, elucidating that reconciliation seemed unlikely given his persistent resentment. Karen comprehended, yet began involving David in our activities, anticipating it might foster a closer relationship. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she invited David, and we watched whatever he chose. During this time, David and I uttered a few remarks, a notable betterment from his customary silence. I remember Karen and David spending time and engaging in gaming together, yet I gave it little thought. Karen told me that one day David confided in her about his difficulties following a recent separation. Feeling exposed, he cultivated a bond with her. She mentioned that he would innocently engage in flirtatious banter with her in my absence, and ultimately, matters progressed beyond her ability to manage. The mental image of my spouse and sibling engaged in intimacy sickened me. Karen admitted to experiencing remorse thereafter and ceased contact with him, aligning with her sudden choice to return home rather than celebrate New Year's with me. Although I tried to convince her to stay, she was resolute in her departure. When we met back at college after the holidays, she was her customary buoyant demeanor, so I raised no inquiries. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Karen confessed uncertainty regarding the child's paternity, whether it was mine or David's, and lacking proof, she opted to remain with me, perceiving me as the more reliable sibling. This was why we got married. My entire existence seemed to crumble. The child I cherished might not be my own. I asked Karen if she had been sleeping with David recently, and she offered a deliberate nod. She revealed that they had always maintained contact, as their mutual attraction was evident. They would secretly retreat to accommodations, fabricating tales of extended work hours. She admitted that a significant portion of her professional excursions were, in fact, clandestine romantic escapades with him. I asked why she married me if she wanted my brother, and Karen said she did not wish to initiate the dissolution of the marriage. She considered me an exemplary father to our son and resolved to remain. In her words, she committed an error and lost control. I told Karen I was grateful for her honesty, but stated my intention to gather my belongings and depart. She started weeping, pleading for clemency, and anticipating my outburst. Instead, I composedly assembled my attire. Karen asserted that if I truly cared, I should contend for her, and that errors are inherent in all unions. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she altered her approach, claiming our child would suffer from a separation, and that offspring ought not to be reared in fractured environments. I recalled to her that I might not be the biological father, prompting further tears and accusations of harshness. It seemed like she believed nothing could compel me to abandon the marriage. Perhaps my past leniency contributed to this belief. While I did care for her, it felt more like it originated from the conviction that we shared a child and had been partners since our university days. Karen persisted in asserting it was not too late to rectify matters, yet I found it difficult to trust her, and my patience had eroded. Confidence was a significant problem, and her statements rang empty. Even with forgiveness, I could never erase the knowledge of her intimacy with my brother. I held the conviction that errors should be pardoned, as humanity is fallible, but this transgression exceeded tolerable boundaries. I departed, leaving her weeping at the threshold, and secured a room at a hotel. The next day, I proceeded directly to my parents' home and divulged the full extent of my wife's liaison with David, detailing their years of clandestine intimacy. The astonishment etched upon their countenances was palpable. Consistent with her character, my mother initially attempted to shield David, contending that her son would never commit such an act against his sibling. Resolute in unveiling the facts, I requested my parents to keep silent and permit me to contact David in their presence. I directed them to remain hushed, enabling me to surprise David and lead him to believe our exchange was confidential. When David answered the phone, I challenged him regarding the illicit relationship. At first, he adamantly rejected the accusation, declining to bear any accountability. However, when I told him that Karen had confessed completely, he began to fault her, branding her as lacking integrity. He asserted it was not his culpability if females found him appealing, and that he was the more handsome sibling. I informed him resolutely that I would reveal his actions to all. When David taunted me, Declaring no one would credit my story due to his status as the favored son, I derided his conceit and expressed gratitude for his corroboration of the truth, aware our parents had overheard the entire exchange. David fell silent, then stammered, endeavoring to articulate his position and preserve his reputation. My mother, still in shock, insisted on an account from David. He hesitantly delivered a weak effort to vindicate his behavior, implicating others yet absolving himself, and desperately attempting to displace responsibility onto Karen. I could see my mother, once guardian of her preferred child, now experienced a blend of disillusionment and ire. In that intense instant, I experienced an unusual sensation of justification. For years I had suffered David's torment. Now the facts were public, and the positions inverted. David was revealed, his conduct transparent for all to witness. As David's statements wavered, my father, typically restrained in his demeanor, could not conceal his displeasure. He asked me to pass him the phone and commenced conversing with David. "David," my father began, his tone heavy with displeasure, "what you've done isn't just treachery against your sibling, but also a breach against our lineage. You engaged in intimacy with your brother's spouse and prolonged the liaison even subsequent to their nuptials. Your deeds bear dire repercussions and have irretrievably fractured the confidence we placed in you. I instilled in both of you the importance of familial allegiance and propriety. Your conduct today contravenes all I sought to impart." He paused, letting the gravity of his pronouncements penetrate David's moral awareness. "Your indifference to your brother's emotions and the disrespect for his marital union are intolerable. You've not only hurt him, but also severed the ties that bind our kin. Your mother and I are partially accountable for your transformation, yet we shall no longer countenance this conduct. From today, you're excluded from the educational endowments I established for you. You will need to ascertain how to finance your university tuition independently. I will also cease subsidizing your existence. Do you perceive it as a mark of manhood to engage with married women? Let us observe your resourcefulness without my financial assistance." Throughout this, I preserved a calm bearing. While I initially yearned to shout at David, witnessing my father chastise him offered supreme justification. I had unmasked his authentic character, and it was evident he had misjudged the repercussions. My mother, despite David's unyielding objections, persisted in defending him, but my father promptly terminated the conversation, stifling David's endeavors to rationalize his deeds. Afterward, my mom approached me and enveloped me in an embrace. A considerable period had passed since such a connection, yet within that hug lay an unspoken comprehension and solace amidst the familial chaos. She offered her apologies for her long-standing disbelief. My younger self, aged 14, could never have conceived of this moment of being vindicated and held by my mother. Following this, my dad assisted me in securing competent legal representation for Karen's divorce. She and her lawyer tried to employ underhanded tactics, demanding spousal support given my higher income, but her infidelity substantially benefited my case. We also commissioned a paternity examination, which verified David was, in fact, the child's biological father. The revelation inflicted immense pain, surpassing the anguish of uncovering Karen's disloyalty. I was enraged that the child I had cherished and brought up was not biologically my own. However, I decided to stay strong. Karen implored me to maintain contact with my son, contending he ought not to suffer for the circumstances, yet I found it intolerable to see him. He too strongly evoked David, and I detested it. After my separation was concluded, a wave of liberation enveloped me as I relocated to my own single dwelling. It felt unreal to dwell independently, having married at a youthful age and never truly having the opportunity to embrace autonomy. However, my innately self-reliant disposition enabled me to swiftly adjust to my novel way of life, and I savored it completely. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he was contemplating altering his last testament, as he desired to bequeath nothing to David. My dad is exceedingly unyielding, and once he resolved to disinherit David, he adhered to his decision. David tried to contact our parents and even appeared at their residence, pleading for pardon, but they declined entry. Even my mother, typically amenable to David's outbursts, appeared to have reached her limit with him, despite it likely being the most difficult for her. David never messaged me to express remorse for his conduct, indicating a lack of regret. His distress was solely over his estrangement from our parents. Dad told me he intended to bequeath all to me, guaranteeing David would not later challenge the will. David would receive merely $1. My gaze expanded in astonishment, as my father had toiled diligently throughout his life, his holdings including assets, pension, and life assurance, cumulatively approaching $2 million. The sole stipulation in his testament was that should my father predecease my mother, she would retain residence in their home, even if ownership devolved to me. I found this acceptable, as I wished to provide for my mother in her declining years. Somehow David became aware of this and, unable to contact our parents, telephoned me yesterday, attempting to reconcile. He elaborated on his academic difficulties and how, subsequent to Karen learning the child's paternity, she had been relentlessly pursuing him for child maintenance. He asserted he had no funds and, despite seeking part-time employment, had found no opportunities. He implored me to intercede with our family for a new beginning, as he desperately required my assistance. I scoffed at him directly and declared our relationship terminated. I recalled to him that he ought to have considered the repercussions prior to engaging in intimacy with my spouse and impregnating her. David contended I was being unjust and that Karen also bore responsibility, to which I concurred. I recalled that I had divorced her, thus rendering her his obligation. He ought not to contact me with grievances regarding her or the child, as these were the outcomes of his own choices. David began to elevate his tone, but I interjected, reminding him he was no longer the cherished son within the family, but the outcast who had betrayed his own brother's trust with his spouse. At that moment, David commenced weeping, relaying how all, including our grandparents and extended kin, had ostracized him. While accurate, this was no longer my worry. I informed him our association was over and he should refrain from contacting me ever again, as I no longer regarded him as a sibling. Since then, I have repeatedly replayed that dialogue. Despite my strong aversion to my brother, I had not witnessed his tears, at least not since our childhood. I confess, it pained me somewhat to observe his profound helplessness. Thus, I suppose I am seeking guidance on whether I should speak to our parents on his behalf, or if I would be remiss if I did not. Update 1. Hello, everyone. Numerous inquiries have arisen regarding my current estrangement from Henry, with some even labeling my actions as heartless. It is imperative to clarify that I am not at ease with the prospect of raising another man's offspring. This is not a scenario involving a stepchild. I was deceived into believing Henry was my biological son, only to subsequently learn he is, in fact, my brother David's child. Understandably, this disclosure inflicted profound emotional distress, leading to days of weeping. The primary rationale for my decision to avoid all contact with Henry stems from my desire to permanently remove Karen from my existence. Should I maintain a connection to her child, she would inevitably find a means to re-enter my life, and I require my solitude. You might perceive me as callous or self-centered, but I cannot bring myself to encounter him again, at least not for the foreseeable future. Update 2. The majority of you accurately surmised that my mother was the source who apprised David of my father's testamentary alterations, prompting David's desperate call to me in an attempt to rectify the situation. I challenged her in my father's presence, and she became emotional, asserting I had sufficiently chastised David and that he had absorbed his lesson. My father sternly informed my mother that if she considered David's actions pardonable, then he could no longer remain wedded to her, as he could never excuse such an act of treachery. This declaration rendered my mother speechless. My father unequivocally stated that if she ever communicated with David again and this came to our attention, she would be expected to depart. As I've noted, my father possesses a resolute nature. One hopes my mother will profit from her misjudgments. Update 3. Reddit. 5 months have elapsed since my most recent communication. My relationship with my parents has seen considerable enhancement in recent times. My father and I engage in golf each weekend, and he now regards me more as a close companion than simply a son. Despite my mother's longing for David, she has maintained her distance. The most recent intelligence regarding David came from my cousin, who reported David had been soliciting funds from various individuals and ultimately had to withdraw from his tertiary education due to financial constraints. He and Karen are cohabiting, and he is employed part-time as a mechanic. Evidently, they are jointly raising Henry, which I suppose is a positive development. I avoid discussions about David with my parents, and they similarly refrain from mentioning him. To those inquiring, I am faring quite favorably. I received a promotion at my workplace 2 months prior, resulting in a substantial increase in my remuneration. I have not pursued any romantic relationships, as I sense a continued need for time and personal space to recover. I have commenced therapy, so we shall observe its efficacy. I extend my gratitude for your viewership. If you have not yet subscribed, I kindly request you to do so and activate the notification icon to remain informed of further astonishing, real-life narratives unfolding around you.